For many, many years that I was working in the Israeli Foreign Service, I had the various opportunities to work along European representatives that worked tirelessly, sparing no effort to advance peace between Israelis and Palestinians, trying to move and to advance a solution between Israeli and Arabs, and is far enough for me that I wouldn't see him blushing, but you see one of the very, very top and devoted European diplomats sitting on this panel, worked tirelessly to advance peace. But yet, all these years, I could sense with my European counterpart a sort of frustration. Usually, Europe was not credited, in Israel definitely, was not credited to the extent of their contribution to enabling Israelis and Palestinians one day to live in peace. And the usual reaction of many of my European friends was, well, you have the Americans to lead the political peace negotiations, and us, Europe, you leave us to serve as the purse of the process, as the checkbook of the process. The frustration is real, was real, and I think that there is a lot of injustice being done to the European involvement along the course of all these years to its contribution to peace. What could be a European move, some change in the European performance, so Europe will have better leverage in the peace process through having better relationship, not with the Israeli government, but with the Israeli public. Sure, Europe must continue to advance her positions regarding the compromise needed to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But there are two or three things which I would like to discuss in a short way, that if Europe would be a little bit more aware of it, a little bit more sympathetic to the average Israeli concerns, I believe that Europe will increase in a serious way its ability to perform and even to lead in the peace process. The most important issue is security. I'm doing for many years polls, public polls in Israel. And in every poll where the, let's say, the package of the main parameters that can enable peace between us and the Palestinians, 67 line with equal swap of land, Jerusalem is divided to a Palestinian capital and an Israeli capital, and so on and so forth. You get a majority in Israel every time you give them this package, but those who are saying no, if you want to get them to change their mind from saying no to saying yes to the agreement, the major element that you have to add to the agreement is security.
In spite of the rhetoric change in the Israeli language as a result of many changes in the region and in the world, in spite of the change in their rhetoric, and when someone like Netanyahu speaks about two states now, the Israeli behavior and practice in the Palestinian occupied territories is still stemming from the assumption that this land is for Israel and that the Palestinians are not existing. And I would challenge and say that there had, until this moment, there had not been any strategic decision by the Israeli governments in favor of the two-state solution. Israel, at the maximum, thinks about entities, about any arrangements, but there haven't been a strategic decision in Israel to accept the principle of the two-states solution. The United States has been all the time trying to adapt itself to the position of the Israeli government. And the United States was trying all the time to prevent any role for Europe or Russia in some time in the past, saying that there is a peace process and do not interrupt the peace process. But the problem is to recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people. Here we have a problem. And if you listen carefully to the Israeli leadership of today, they demand that we recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people. For us, this means two things. It means the denial of the rights of the Arabs living in Israel to continue to live in Israel. Those Arabs who were living in their villages and towns before the creation of the State of Israel. The moment you say that Israel is the state of the Jews, these people have no right in this state. And the more dangerous thing for us is that recognizing Israel as the state of the Jews or the Jewish people means the denial of the right of the Palestinian refugees from 1948 to claim the right of return. Our position on the right of return, we say that the Palestinian refugees have the right of return, and we are ready to put this right on the table and negotiate it. But we cannot give up on that right in advance before we start negotiations, and we believe that addressing the right of return should be part of the package deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Thank you very much.
By the United Nations Resolution 181, I think we all around this table, we find it a very enlightening document. And the Resolution 181 of November 1947 says there will be two states on the former British mandate territory of Palestine, one Arab and one Jewish. So I think the principle is clear. I would also presume that each side should be able to define what means Arab to an Arab and what Jewish means to a Jew. The distinction, therefore, must lead to two states for two people, and each state should have a profile which is recognizably by the definition. Arab is Arab, or Palestinian is Palestinian, and Jewish is Jewish. A state of Israel which is more homogeneously of one type, and the Palestinian state would be basically absolutely Palestinian with no Jewish presence at all. This is at least the model that I hear from many people. This way, the State of Israel would have a Jewish majority, which would be more significant than at present. In fact, if I don't include the territories, the so-called territories, which is, again, the West Bank and Gaza, the Jewish majority in Israel is about 80%. It is a significant majority, but I think perhaps not enough to ensure stability in the future. Don't forget that in Cyprus, in the 1960s, there were about 82% of Greeks and about 18% of Turks, and the mix between these two didn't work quite well. In fact, at some point, there was a lot of transfer. Greeks moved to the south and Turks moved to the north, and then there is now a horizontal line which, passing through Nicosia, separates the two parts. So this is not, of course, what we would like to envisage in our peaceful Middle East. Therefore, it's better to do some agreed territorial exchanges that might ensure a majority in each state by their own ethnic or ethno-religious group. Having said that, it must be clear, adamant clear, that every citizen in a state has the same rights.
Speaking about the European role, Ziad said there's urgency for a European role. And not more than this, for an European initiative. Now, I think that whatever could be the positive outcome of a critical attitude of the European Union towards the two parties, as I said at the beginning, in order to gain the role of an honest broker, Europe, a European Union, must also listen to the parties in a way that it will be able to grasp what could be a common ground, something that could be like a minimum common denominator for the parties, in order to suggest some new proposals, new ideas, as was mentioned before, not only economic ideas but also political ideas, and this I think both Ziad Abu Zayad and Avigil agree, to improve and to upgrade the role of Europe. And this initiative, European initiative, should be political initiative. I think my perception is that there is a room for this if the European institution would earn and would deserve this role.
The solution cannot come unless the two states recognize themselves in their own rights as population, economic institutions, and religion.
I'm a bit disappointed of the turn of this debate. We've heard that before. I would have liked the local parties to talk a little bit about what they hope the world will do and what will happen to them in view of what's happening in their region. The house is on fire, and you seem to continue to argue about who's going to take the kids to school. I think you should be worried. You should be worried because what's happening in the region is turning away attention from your problem. How many lines in the last European decisions are about the Middle East peace process? Well, I see one communication which says half a line. It says, and we should not forget also that we need to solve the Israeli-Arab conflict. You should be worried. You should be worried because there's so much attention that the world can give to a particular problem at the moment, and the UN is the same. It's about Libya, it's about Yemen, it's about what's happening in the chain reaction, Syria, and all these things. And you should be even more worried because there's no peace and there's no process. Because of mainly three reasons. One is that you don't want to negotiate. Neither side wants to negotiate. Neither side has any trust left in the other one. Secondly, because you have weak leaderships. And thirdly, because the third parties, the US, the EU, the Quartet, you name it, are themselves not showing a lot of energy to actually do something that what needs to be done. We have to get away from this idea that the the third parties cannot wish peace more than the parties themselves. It is not true. When we want an arrangement, we do it. That's what we did in the Balkans.